Hello again, this is RP-0 America. So we're just, I time warped up to approaching Venus. We're just about to cross the threshold into, as I speak, into its sphere of influence. It's about 60 days until a mission I'm going to do off-screen where, let me just focus in, where I complete the lunar contracts. They're going to be exactly the same as the one you watched, just, I'm going to get complete contracts with them this time. So we've got a nice close approach to Mars. I don't feel any need to do any real adjustments, but I'll still show how you would do an adjustment while within the sphere of influence of Mars. So you notice it's kind of hard to click. Oh, it's behaving all better than it usually does to click close there. But in practice, I often just use the same trick I used to do the mid-course correction, or I click to go to Add Maneuver, and then manipulate the maneuver node editor. Just jump the time a whole bunch forward and backwards, so you get to select when it happens. So in practice, it might let me slide it out. Woohoo. No, close-ish. I should be able to get close-ish to it, which is good enough for me. But in practice, using this tool, you can get it arbitrarily close to where your craft actually is, just by adjust this time to save whatever you want to save time and clicks. But then you can set up whatever maneuver you would like to do to see what impact. Okay, prograde's probably not the best example because that means directly in my direction of travel, which isn't going to have much of an impact on things. Let me just null that out. So let's say a couple. See, I could move it out radially a bit, or I could here. Let me null that out. So mostly what at least I would be interested in doing would be to try to run into one of the moons, or just not maybe run into it, just get within the sphere of influence of one of them. In part, that's just going to be kind of by the luck of where those moons are in their orbital paths when you come around. And you can tweak that a little bit through Prograde and such. In reality, when you could make these predictions, there's no such thing as the sphere of influence in reality. And so you'd be able to make these predictions much further out and then predict. And just small tweaks to your prograde, just shifting when you arrive in the system by hours, just through small adjustments, you could make it a high probability that you could get a close flyby of Phobos or Deimos. Not sure how that's pronounced. In practice, it's a bit harder, I find, with the KSP tools to guarantee you'll get a flyby of one of the moons unless you pop yourself into orbit, which we definitely don't have the delta V to do. So let me just do a little more tweaking here to see what I could get away with. No, it just looks like it's not going to have any real chance of getting an encounter with Phobos, which is okay. I mean, that wasn't my initial goal. This is just a first flyby. If I could have got a bit closer to coming in around I'd call this the equator. Don't know if it's really the equator of Mars, but just kind of in plane with the planes of the moons, I'd have a much better chance. And with also the planning tools, it would be a lot easier. But in practice, 220 kilometers is plenty close. And one other thing I just want to show, I always use these, when I create a new career, like the first flyby of the planet to remind me what can I do, how much DV would I actually have had to bring to get in orbit. And so it would have been just under, that's a pretty substantial amount, 800 meters per second would have given me a basic orbit. The further away you are at your flyby, you're going to need a little more delta V because of the Oberth effect. So you want to get close-ish to get your most efficient, but also, at least I find this correlation, the larger a burn you did in leaving Earth system to get this encounter, the faster you'll be when you go by Mars, which means more velocity you're going to have to kill off in order to get into orbit of Mars. But in practice, I'm going to be very thankful I'm probably not going to be able to find Mars until we get closer, and I won't waste recording time trying to find it. So I'll just snag some science and transmit that. Yeah, lots of science. Once you can do your first flybys, there's a couple of choke points, or there's a better word for it, but I remember it offhand at the moment. And choke points both in kind of cache or missions or science, but so in terms of science, this is really a point where you've crossed through, and once you can do a flyby of Mars and a flyby of Venus and maybe get encounters with their moons as well, you can really start racking up the science. Even with these little probes that, it just has a little bit of ability to maneuver, but as long as it can survive to the sphere influence of Mars. You can get a contract, which will give you some good cash. It's a long wait, right? It's a long wait to wait while you leave the sphere of influence of Earth to get your flyby with Mars. But really like whose line is it anyway? The dates don't matter. The days don't really matter in RP-0, right? It's about kind of how much work you will personally have to put in order to get something accomplished. So we're 1 day away. So yeah, once you're kind of that close to Mars, the little adjustments you could make with your maneuver aren't going to have a huge impact. So I could, if I was being more cautious, I would probably set up a maneuver node or something so that I wouldn't accidentally warp past Mars. Now, what would happen if I did spend this 150 meters per second? Because it's not like I'm going to have, there's nowhere else to spend it. I can't take, technically I do take the Delta V left in the craft with me when I leave, but it's really of no use to me. And it's really of no use to me here either. I could have set up a crash, but I mean, I'd rather do the flyby first. Oh, come on, I hit M to, whoa. I'm not sure if you saw that. It was like a quick mid-frame render where it just had a black cube around my craft, which makes me think of my old physics drawings in physics classes. Whereas, let us approximate this dog to be a box. Let us approximate the house to be a box. So I wouldn't waste time on drawing. So it's like let's approximate your probe to a rectangular box. All right, so when we get a bit closer, I'm not sure what the altitude is where you switch between Mars high and Mars low, and I would usually just look this up in the config files if I was curious. Like if I was not currently going to get a really close encounter, if it was going to be a good bit of work, I would have looked this up in the configs to see when, how close do I have to get my flyby of Mars to get that sweet low Mars science. I may as well watch it as I come in. So I believe I've got some RVE config here, which makes Mars a bit more cloudy. I can see some wisps, which are nice. It's pretty bright, which I think it's a little too bright, but that's all right. It's not like I visit Mars very often anyway. Oh, so we're close enough to get some science. Let me change to free cam, because the auto cam will just change modes all crazy. So Geiger counter just above the Midlands. And science. So while in space near Mars, what altitude am I at now? So it might have been 5,000, just like the moon is. I'm not sure, but all I know is right now at 1,200, I'm definitely close enough to get science. Maybe it was 1,250. I don't know, because it did pop me out of time warp when I got here, didn't it? I'd have to look back to check for myself, but lots of science, lots and lots of science recovered here. Just transmitted back from Mars. So that's approaching just 10 minutes away from our closest approach of Mars. So yeah, you can get some pretty, in practice, you'd get some pretty nice pictures of Mars as you got this close of a flyby. And some of those experiments, I believe, were biome based. Currently, I don't have the technology to reveal the biomes. I believe ScanSat will. I'll need to fly by a ScanSat. But if you want to cheat just a little bit, and if you want to set up an encounter, like let's say I got a flyby that would let me kind of zoom over the pole, or rather from north to south or south to north, rather than going around the belt like this. If you open up the debug, you could make it so the biomes will show. So you could set up your path where you're close to the moon, so that you're going to cross over as many biomes as you can. Obviously this isn't permanently recorded biome data, but it's useful. It's a useful little trick if you want to squeeze a bit more science, or really just get a kind of an earlier view about, why am I not getting as much science from this flyby as somebody else, or as I potentially could. So that's where you can see that before you've done a formal ScanSat scan to see your biomes. We're pretty close. So this vertical speed will go from negative to 0 and then into the positive. And you can see just the wisps of cloud. Mars looks really nice. I just think it's a little bright, but that could also just be the position of the sun, right? The position of the sun might be what's causing it to appear bright at this time of day during this flyby. And we are, well, you can see the shell of wispy Mars clouds. That's cool. And now there we've passed our closest flyby of Mars. and this probe can't do a thing about it. It's just got this little bit of maneuvering delta V, which in practice, if we had to, would be enough, if we actually had to point back at Earth, wherever Earth may be. I don't believe it's visible right now. If you play with remote tech, I think you might actually have to plan your flyby so that you have visibility, you have a line of sight, so you can't let Mars get in between you and Earth. So you'd have to be a bit more careful which side of Mars you came in on, which is something I could have controlled which side I came in on. Just like the same way that I used maneuvers to get my maneuver closer and closer to Mars, if I had kept going, it would have kind of passed through the center of mass, and then I would have done a flyby on the opposite side. So you can anticipate that and kind of try to plan that if you play with remote tech. It's just another kind of, for me, it just feels like another level of frustration, but as everything gets smoother, I might try it out at some point. Who knows? But that's as close as we got to Mars, so we'll say goodbye. I wasn't able to see any of the moons from this view, but of course I'm terrible at scanning around and making myself dizzy trying to see other bodies. But there we go. And I believe that's right. Like, Kill actually looked up some sources. Notice how the atmosphere is kind of wispy blue there. You see a little bit. And the reason the Earth's atmosphere is blue is just a reason of physics, not a reason of the specific gases that Earth has in the atmosphere. And so it's kind of the color of the scattering of the light, that fact of how light scatters. It seems reasonable that some pictures of the sky and on Mars are color corrected in various ways, but I believe that's right, that there should be some blue in the kind of the atmospheric view of the moon, or of Mars. But there we go. So that is our flyby of Mars. I might be able to also get in a flyby of Venus. We'll have to wait for the next window, which will be a year or two from now. Whoa, just changing cams. And I would use a similar probe just so I could see Venus, because it'll look really nice. In my, if you look back at my Soviet playlist, where I did some Soviet RP-0, I did a really nice flyby. I believe I called the probe Venera, where I show the kind of the building, the launch, and the flyby of Venus of my probe. So in this series, we got to fly by Mars, and in the Soviet series, we flew by Venus, which feels right to me, because I believe that kind of felt like the focus of the different space agencies. The United States focused a bit more on Mars, and the Soviet Union focused a bit more on Venus. Oh, it's a shame I didn't have that set. I'll have to remember that next time. Just because, so, the planet would have looked much more kind of, I prefer the kind of the stark realism. Even right now, there's kind of a magic camera, from my perspective, that's shining light on the probe and shining light on Mars. So when I did that flyby, when I passed over the terminator, where the bright side versus the dark side of Mars is, I would have had a kind of a much more realistic view. See, that's really what it should look like, right? The night side of Mars should be dark. And sometimes I forget that. See, just some, the mod adds light. It's additive of light everywhere, and so it adds light to the bright side, which made it look brighter to me, and it adds light to the dark side, which makes it look much less dark than it should. But anyway, that was our lovely flyby of Mars. This probe has done its job brilliantly, sent us lots of science back to Earth, and in the next video I will be attempting doing probably some construction or attempt to land a small probe on the moon, because that's one of the last things I'd like to do in this video series before everything is updated to 1.1, which is progressing. RSS is released. If you look on GitHub, our RSS, there will be an RSS release. You have to go to RSS textures as well and download the release of your choice with the texture quality of your choice. So you can get the highest quality texture if you like. Just keep in mind, if your computer itself only has 8 gigs of memory, it might be better to select the medium texture or something like that rather than the high-end texture, because even if KSP isn't limited to 32-bit memory, your computer is still limited to what physical RAM it has. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Goodbye.